So greetings, everyone. We're here with Robert Grillo. He's the founder of Slaughter Free Chicago, a group that has made historic progress in shutting down slaughterhouses in Chicago, which was once called the slaughter capital of the United States, or what was the nickname of?
That's what we call it. It's had many names in the past, like hog butcher to the world. We call it the slaughter capital of the world because that was really the intention. A group of really wealthy industrialists got together and decided that they were going to take this beautiful wetland on the south side of Chicago and turn it into a massive meat packing and slaughter complex the world has never seen.
Wow.
And so actually a tourist destination during that time. And it was, you could go into a tourist store, like a little tourist station, and you could find postcards of the Union stockyards.
Wow. Oh, kind of. That's bizarre. And so you've had successes. How many slaughterhouses have been shut down since you began as a result of, your pressure, your work?
So it's, in some cases, it's really hard to tell if it's permanent shutdown, but there's been 3 that have closed.
Wow.
And one's been closed for a year. We think they might be trying to reopen again, but we've really built a lot of support in certain communities where these slaughterhouses operate. And what we found time and time again, and I think Jill and others in the other chapters that we have would reinforce this, that when you go out there and talk to the neighboring business owners and residents, overwhelmingly they support what we're doing. Mm-hmm. They have problems. One guy we talked to said he was doing just to give you an example, one guy said he was working on a construction project and a bird was taking shelter, a bird that had escaped the slaughterhouse was taking shelter. Wow. In a construction site. And he was like, I took video of it. I felt so bad for this bird. It was just trying to find shelter in our site. It had escaped. And so he's like, yeah, we never want to see that place open again. And so we have a lot of support. I think we know how to get support in those communities. So we have that. We have litigation, the threat of litigation for these places. And then, like I said before, our pressure campaign on city officials is really our focus because they have the power to meet our demands. So keeping the pressure on them is essential.
Yeah. I remember you sent me a peer-reviewed study or a scientific study a while back about the impact of slaughterhouses on communities in terms of increasing violence. I remember even sexual violence rates had gone up as a result of it. So that's a really effective argument. Most people, I think, do have empathy for animals, but even from a purely human rights standpoint, to say, having this here is creating, the workers are getting PTSD and they're going home and there's, there's an empirical fact that is leading to these increases in crime. So,
right.
And it's generally, it's generally marginalized communities. These slaughterhouses are not going to be in the Sohos and the wealthy neighborhoods. They're going to be in the poor neighborhoods, right? Because who wants to work those jobs unless you have few other options? So, it's human exploitation, at the same time as animal exploitation. That's the point, right? So, and so then that leads to the question of, because then the argument would be, yeah, but people need jobs, right? So what's the answer to the economic question? Saying, okay, you're going to get rid of all these people's work, then what?
Right. So just to put things into context, in our own city, which is very different, I'm sure, than a city like New York or another place, maybe Toronto, but in our own city, we're talking about maybe 60 jobs. Okay. Wow. So in each of these places, there might be 2 to 3 workers. So
these are all live markets. Sorry for interrupting. These are all small scale what are called live markets.
Two large animal slaughterhouses that probably employ about 10 people each.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then about 10 of these small storefront bird slaughterhouses that employ a couple of people.
Which for clarification, live markets and wet markets are the same thing.
I think it's a matter of semantics to a certain extent, to talk about the two. Wet markets is the term that is, associated with the pandemic. And so I think it's appropriate to use that word in this context. I mean, we have our own wet markets.
Yeah.
But in any case, to answer your question, so we're talking about 60 jobs, and not that those 60 jobs aren't important, but we think that the city could do something as part of the plan. We feel that the city should be able to come up with a plan to transition these workers into some other type of employment as they close these places down. We feel that the city has the resources to be able to do that. We also have connections with some labor workers' rights groups that we know will consult with the city if they let us in. That's always a big question. Will the city work with us as either experts or collaborators to try to get something like that done? And in some cases they will, but we feel that that's their responsibility. If they're going to shut these places down for all the reasons that they should be shut down, they should also find a solution for the workers.
Yeah, and it's not really like a huge conundrum. It's not like in other cases where robots or machines are taking people's work. Well, then there's nothing for anyone to do. Now, if we're especially pushing towards plant-based food, then there's just an obvious replacement in a huge food industry, which is growing, substantially.
Right.
It's definitely a winning economic argument. We got so many headlines and statistics that back us up to show how many billions of dollars are flowing into plant-based food now. So you're right. It should be a no-brainer changing industries, but I guess I just wanted to make that point because I know there are activists who might take a different angle and say, well, animals' lives is more important than jobs, and it doesn't need to be a dichotomy. Is what I'm saying. It doesn't need to be either or. Yeah, you can have a win-win situation.
Part of the same problem, isn't it? It's impossible to separate the issues of what's happening with animals and how these places impact multiple dimensions. I mean, it's impossible to separate.
Yeah.
What they do to the environment, what they do to workers, and what they do to animals. And it's not all the same, obviously. I mean, there's different degrees of suffering and different kinds of suffering involved. So we wouldn't just throw it all into one category, but they're all interconnected, of course.
Yeah, the current situation is lose-lose, and the solution would be a win-win, right, for humans and animals. So because we discussed, calling this wet markets versus live markets, that brings us to the question of disease. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic started in a wet market in Wuhan, but so many other pandemics have started in similar places or in animal agriculture in general. And I know you mentioned that one of the most effective arguments you had for closing down slaughterhouses you did was the health code violations and just general health. So while some people may say, oh, well, coronavirus is just bats and pangolins, that has nothing to do with cows, pigs, and chickens. What are some of the health threats to humans that come from slaughterhouses in our own cities?
Well, I think if we went in and tested, what we'd find is we'd find bacterial infections, we'd find Salmonella, E. coli, prevalent, Listeria maybe. And, bird flu is becoming a major threat. We don't know very much about the different strains and what their potential are to transfer into humans. We're also dealing with a bacterial resistant threat that is potentially going to dwarf what we're seeing. Like there's some estimates that the death toll from a bacterial resistant outbreak could be at 50 million people. That's kind of considered a reasonable estimate. Wow. Once a bacteria that's resistant gets out there and gets out of control, we're really in trouble. It's going to make the coronavirus look like a walk in the park.
Wow.
So it's just incredible how, animal agriculture, is so good at hiding these even greater looming threats that are on the horizon if we don't do something to shut them down. They're really good at distracting our attention away from the problems that they're creating. For example, Tyson, you probably heard today that Tyson took out a full-page ad in the New York Times, which is this beautifully written letter to the public, making the case for why billions of dollars of subsidies should go to helping them, because otherwise the food supply is going to come crashing down. When, in reality, the crisis is not the disappearance of animal agriculture. The crisis is their existence, and that what the crisis is that they are contributing to. That's the real crisis. They spin that into making it look like, oh my God, there's going to be a huge meat shortage and we're all going to die. Yeah, it's like, excuse me, millions of us live without your products, and actually we thrive in spite of it. So yeah, the way we're getting the narrative from them is like we're fighting against a false narrative, that we have to defend them and we have to bail them out and we have to consume their products or we're all just going to explode.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I don't have statistics on E. coli, salmonella, listeriosis, diseases that just commonly kill people as a result of animal agriculture. But I know heart disease, the global figure is 17 million. In the United States, it's over 600,000, and is becoming more common knowledge now, the right whole food plant-based diet can completely eliminate heart disease. So very, very, very few people out of those huge numbers have a genetic condition that makes the heart disease completely unconnected to what they eat. The vast majority of those people are getting it as a result of their food, and animal foods are the core of that. So more than 600,000 people a year is, I hope the coronavirus doesn't kill anyone else in the United States, but even the worst predictions are going to even approach that. So as far as like you're saying, we're going to die we're going to starve to death of this food. Actually, the number one cause of death is heart disease, which is, connected to that kind of thing. So. So if somebody wanted to replicate your success in their own city, what advice would you have for them to get started?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because we've been working very hard at a chapter setup guide. And, we've got chapters working in Minneapolis, in Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Dallas, Toronto, as you know, LA. And so there's also discussions about a chapter in Uganda, in the capital of Uganda. An activist there came to us and wants to create a slaughter-free Kampala, which is the capital city. And so it's really got us thinking about, and also Anita at Animal Save Movement, and her and I have brainstormed. She's really impressed upon me, the need for greater direction, how to set up a chapter, how to create actions, how to do your visuals and your messaging and create carry out your campaigns and all the different facets of that. It's a lot to think through, really. And so I think this chapter setup guide will be a work in progress for a while, but I posted it here, the link to it, if anyone wants to take a look at it.
So I can include that in the video details when I actually upload this. That's awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome to post it. It's kind of broken into, if you want to get into this a little bit, I can kind of just say that it's broken into kind of two sections, and it's reflective of the way how our campaign evolved, which was first phase being the research and laying the foundation for the chapter. And so that was like, what slaughterhouses exist in our city? Where's the municipal code, and what does the municipal code have to say? What are the laws specific to these slaughterhouses? Getting reports of violations and going over these to see, which ones we should target because they're the low-hanging fruit. And then maybe working on a lawsuit that could get a lot of publicity.
Right.
And then determining which city officials will be our targets, because they have the jurisdiction and the power to meet our demands. Right. And then compiling all these details into kind of a strategy brief for everybody that's involved. So that's like our phase one. And then phase two is like things like creating your case for closing slaughterhouses. This is what you're going to use to present to the public, to the media, and to city officials to really make a strong, consistent case. Establishing your social media presence. Developing your actions. We've come up with an action development tool to help people come up with effective, impactful actions.
Mhm.
and then developing a media strategy, making connections in the traditional media, and doing public outreach, like I said before, where you go out into the neighborhoods where slaughterhouses operate and build support.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what this chapter setup guide is about. And we're totally open to feedback. If anybody goes through it and finds that there's something missing or something could be improved upon, we're all ears, because we want this to be the best guide we could have.
Awesome. Yeah. So hopefully we'll get more experience as more, as the movement expands, as it goes into the cities. I just want to ask one final question that, if somebody says, hey, what's the point in closing down a slaughterhouse in this city? They'll just open it somewhere else. As long as people are still eating animals, they're going to kill them somewhere. So, what's our answer to that? Why focus on slaughterhouses? I have my own thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
Okay. Yeah. So my response to that is that we have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
In our case, it made sense to start in the city that promoted itself as the slaughter capital of the world at one point, because the symbolic significance of ending slaughter in a city that once promoted itself as the slaughter capital is huge. The symbolic importance of that. But the other facet of this is that it's really based on a model that Martin Luther King popularized for grassroots activism. And that is that you start where the injustice is greatest. You start where there's the epicenter of the injustice. And in his case, maybe it was Selma or Birmingham. In our case, it's Chicago. And you start there and you create a groundswell for it. And then it spreads. He says, once you create it there, then through the media and through word of mouth, that movement spreads everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it kind of worked that way in the civil rights movement. And we're using that as a model because we believe that what he did was, so profound. And we think that perhaps that's a good model for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I fully agree. B, just add a couple of points that in the fight to close down slaughterhouses during the course of the campaign, because like you said, you're creating an issue in the city that ideally gets press coverage, even just from going door to door and speaking about this issue. We are essentially making people confront the fact that we are eating animals that I think it's a very real issue to people when you remind them that they're being killed in their own city. So even if it takes months or years to close down a slaughterhouse, every person you speak to in the meantime, every person who reads a news article is now thinking about this issue and saying, well, hey, yeah, I don't like this. I don't like that they're killing all these cows or all these birds in my city. And people are smart. They can put two and two together and realize, maybe I shouldn't be contributing to ourselves. And we can politely, suggest the same thing. Hey, thanks for signing this petition. But if you're interested in, making a huge difference yourself, here's a vegan starter kit, here's a link to the Game Changers, something like that, to get them started. That's one thing. The other thing is that, why are slaughterhouses in major cities as opposed to in rural areas? I think there's an economic reason that they've set them up in the way the system is set up. It's always about minimizing their costs and making an end product that's as cheap as possible. So if we create difficulty for their industry and we do force them to close down slaughterhouses, that's a very expensive problem to have to reopen a slaughterhouse somewhere else that's less ideal for them. During that time, we're disrupting their supply chain. We're making the entire thing more expensive. And if the end product is more expensive, there's empirical data, which I can dig up and put in the video details, that people will consume less of it. I mean, that's just a no-brainer. When things are expensive, people can eat less of it. The example I know of is from animal welfare laws, because there's this whole kind of, not a civil war, but, running argument amongst vegans of animal welfare versus animal rights. And what I would say, and I spoke to James Aspey about this, and he agreed that it doesn't need to be a dichotomy. You can achieve successes for animal welfare that with the same goal of fighting for animal rights, that in the meantime, not only reduce suffering, but actually reduce killing. Because if you make the product more expensive, people buy less of it. So that was in relation to laws against, the worst aspects of factory farming or animal welfare laws, that people were saying, hey, well, you're just justifying killing animals. So what if it's a little bit less cruel? I think the animals would want less cruelty if they could have a choice. But B, it's not just that. It is saving lives. So I would say the same thing applies to shutting down slaughterhouses. making it's a supply and demand issue. Sorry, it's not a supply and demand issue. That's an issue I could talk on in a second. It's an issue of economics and expenses.
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think it's an excellent point that that we do educate the public. It's a collateral benefit of the campaign to see that the campaign's out there, and that gets people's awareness around what happens to animals and how terrible they suffer. And then the other thing that this campaign is good for is it helps build our skills in how to win when it comes to city officials and people in power, whether it be private sector or public sector. It's giving us good skills as activists on how to confront those people in power. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we walk away with, and we become much better from it. We also send a message to other towns and cities that if we can do this here in the slaughter capital of the world, you can do it in that suburb. Or you'll be inspired to do it in a smaller town or something. And I think it will spread that way, just like some of the other movements here have spread, like the animal save movement.
Right.
Or, the cubes of truth, or whatever it might be. So there's potential for spread, but it has to start somewhere, right? Yeah. So why not a place where it all kind of became industrial slaughter?
Absolutely. And I just want to, because I don't think I made myself clear when I said supply and demand. I think I fumbled what I was saying. What I meant to say, if you increase the price of something, we're going to reduce demand. But that connects to something I wanted to ask you about and get your thoughts. So I'm working on the Slaughter-Free Universities campaign, which is entirely on demand. Obviously, there's no slaughterhouses on campus generally. We be pushing universities to have a slaughter-free policy to say, shifting to entirely plant-based food. Some University of Toronto, where I got started right before the pandemic, sadly, has 50,000 students. So that's a lot of animals being consumed. So if U of T would have a slaughter-free policy, it could save a lot of lives. And then the idea there, though, as far as how it connects to what you're doing, is that if we're pushing for slaughter-free policies on campus, if we're pressuring cities, what do you think about the idea of asking cities as well to adopt similar, whether we use the word slaughter-free policy, or whether we use the word plant-based foods, that's an issue of, that's an important question because optics matter, semantics matter. Mm-hmm. But either way, it's the same idea, pushing, city administration, schools, things operated by a city government, because at the end of the day, there's tens of thousands of meals served every day by a municipal government, whether it's in the schools or the offices, at DMV office, things like that, administration, and just kind of push in that direction, because that could have an enormous impact, in terms of a lot of states. So. And the thing is, if we're organizing a campaign anyway targeting the city, why not? Or maybe there's an argument to separate this. What do you think, to separate those ideas?
It's one of our demands when we ask for the slaughterhouses to be shut down. We also ask the city to come up with a plan to promote the plant-based food in institutions like you're talking about. That should be part of the solution. Mm-hmm. It's like transitioning workers. And it's part of a bigger plan. I think they're all connected, and they should be, I think they could easily be incorporated into the same ask. So I guess one of the points I'd like to emphasize is that when we first start this, type campaign, it seems really overwhelming to some people how they're going to get started and how they're going to have an impact. But I will say that there's some really incredible stories from some of our chapters, like the one in Milwaukee, where back in October, about 45 activists was able to kill a $60 million slaughterhouse deal in 12 days. That's kind of the story. So they rallied really quickly to try to prevent the city council from voting on this deal, which apparently, was supposed to go through with no problems, no public input, nobody knew about it. And a group of 45 activists got together and showed up for the city council meeting. I went as well. I'm glad I went, because the night before I was up in the middle of the night thinking, the one alderman that was actually somewhat sympathetic to our cause said, there's no way this is not going to be voted in. It's just a done deal. So I sat up at 3 a.m. and I was like, am I really going to take the drive out to Milwaukee to go to this council meeting when it seems like such a done deal? And something told me I should go. So I did. And what ended up happening is all the media was there. The local media all showed up. And our our organizers there were interviewed. The media came in with their cameras and pointed them on the aldermen. There was a tremendous amount of energy and pressure on them in the room. They had the media on one side, they had us on the other side. And what ended up happening is all it took was one alderman to say, let's suspend this vote. Let's wait until there's more public input. So that worked. The vote got suspended. 3 days later, the slaughterhouse that proposed the deal backed out and said they were no longer pursuing Milwaukee as a location. Wow. And so there's still a chance that they'll try to get in or do something. But I swear for months after that, the media came up with story after story. They were fascinated with the fact that this small group could rally activists in other communities, like communities where the slaughterhouse, groups where the slaughterhouse was proposed, workers groups, environmental groups. They really found allies everywhere, and they were able to mobilize that in a very, very short time. And I think the media was fascinated by how that all took place. And some of the aldermen actually came to our organizers and said, we've never seen anything like that before. We got hundreds of calls the day before we were supposed to vote on this in opposition of this proposal. We've never had a flood of calls like that. Wow. We've never seen this kind of resistance. So 45 people can do a tremendous amount. They can go against a huge corporate Strauss slaughterhouse company and stop them. So, it's an inspiring story that can all, we can all kind of hopefully take something from, but there's a lot we can learn from it. And yes, we have numbers and we need numbers to really do, groundbreaking stuff, but we can also accomplish things even when we're a small group. We can accomplish great things.
To me, that sheds just two massive lessons, I think, from that. A is that when you do shine a light on this issue, the public may be more on our side than we might think. It's not like we're trying to convince the public to everyone go stand on their heads. We're trying, we have an issue that most people have empathy towards animals. Most people are concerned about their health, and most people don't want mass slaughter in their backyard of animals, even if they're not vegan. Most people are turned off by that idea. So just bringing attention to it in and of itself without even having to convince it, there's a lot of people who are already on our side. And I guess the other side of it is that, you came in from Chicago, you said there's activists there from other cities, is that I think that there's so many vegans already in the world. There's so many people who care about this issue who are not necessarily active, but when we show something that is a clear goal that can, in a really direct way, save animals' lives and really direct way make a difference, that can help get people out and coalesce into something that makes a huge difference. Because like you said, you're starting in Chicago you're from Chicago, but there's even if you had to supplant someone anywhere in the world to start, Chicago would be a great city to begin with. But that is how it would work up to a state or a provincial level, depending on the country. And we can envision a future, I think, in the not too distant future, where entire nations might close down slaughterhouses. Personally, I think it might even happen this decade in countries like the UK. Just based on the mathematical trajectory of the increase of veganism. But, knowing that 3,000 animals get killed every second around the world, we can't possibly make this happen fast enough. So we can accelerate that process. Both the shutdown of slaughterhouses and the debate around our exploitation of animals by making this to an issue.
Absolutely. And to your point, in our recent brainstorming sessions about what does slaughter-free mean, because I love the fact that you gave it a new dimension and gave it the idea of a slaughter-free campus. Mm-hmm. Another dimension to this campaign is that slaughter-free means stopping the breeders who breed animals for slaughter. Mm-hmm. So that could have huge, implications as well. If slaughter-free means not just stopping the slaughterhouses or closing them and making food available on campuses that is slaughter-free, it could also mean stopping the breeders. And wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think history is being made. I'm inspired that you're doing this, you know, in the midst of the pandemic, things are still happening. I think a lot of, that was the original actually concept for this video. It said, what can we all be doing while on lockdown to still make a difference? You know, we can't be handing it, we can't be on the street talking to people, but what difference can we still make? So,
yeah. So I felt like we were really starting to build some momentum there. We had a city council meeting disruption where we disrupted a city council meeting. And then 2 weeks later, the mayor's office invited us in for a meeting. We felt like we were really starting to get somewhere. And then this pandemic hit, and we had to realize that the most we can do is, maybe there's more we can do, but for now, what we're doing is email and social media and calling campaigns. And it's a lot easier for you know, officials to kind of, you know, ignore your phone calls and your emails. But they can't ignore you when you show up.
Right.
So, yeah, but I still feel like, you know, I'm really impressed with the numbers that we're getting in terms of like engagement on social media and engagement, and people want to do something now that they're home, especially. It's like they're probably more apt to make phone calls and emails now than ever before.
Yeah, exactly. We should capitalize on that.
Yeah.
Most people probably watched everything on Netflix they're already interested in. It's time to do something.
Like, over and over again.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm super grateful you took the time to speak with me because I know you're extremely busy. Other than the document you sent me, I'm going to add. If there's anything else you want to add that I can include in video details, please send it. Obviously, we'll include links to the website and social media. Yeah, I don't know if there's any final thoughts, but
yeah, no, the website is something that we've been working at a lot too, and you know, please check out our core principles, which is on the About Us page. We ask people to look at that carefully to make sure that the spirit of those principles is something that they can relate to if they want to set up a chapter. And then we have a new page that highlights all of the violations and conditions that we found at Chicago Slaughterhouses, and a video that we produced highlighting all that. So yeah, go check out the website. There's more content up there now.
Yeah, I need to second that motion. I've seen the website. I think you've done like an incredible amount of groundwork that other people should really take advantage of. Obviously, if they're going to set their own website, you know, consult with you before they're going to brand themselves something in relation. But I think that people should really use the hard work you've done, the research you've done in their own cities, because the actual situation is going to be similar in most cities, you know?
Yeah, I mean, just to your point, like this activist in Uganda was describing what the situation was like there. They have laws. They have laws to protect animals, and they have laws that they could use to try to shut some of these places down. They're just not being enforced. Mm-hmm. So it takes activism is about, you know, pressuring the powers that be, and pushing the Overton window open more, so that the public accepts our position more. So it's amazing how similar, you know, the situation is all the way over there.
Yeah. And of course in China, I mean, I don't think YouTube is banned in China, but we'd love to see, of course, you know, people doing similar things in China. I think the government banned supposedly banned wild animal, you know, markets, but there's a growing animal rights movement in China that, you know, they have their own ways around the internet censorship that they can see what we are doing here, you know, and be inspired by it. And of course we can directly collaborate with them as well when possible. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So thanks once again. Can't see my dog, but he says hi. I'll put a picture of him on screen. And so we'll have a meet. We'll follow up, you know, as things go on. We've got things happening in New York. We've got things happening around the world. So stay tuned to everyone watching.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Gabriel.
Okay, awesome. Have a fantastic day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Cheers.